Morning, everyone. Welcome to Guildhall, and it's great to be up here. We've got a short panel today, but with quite a few members, so we're going to have to rush through things if you want to get back on time. So firstly, I think it would be great if we started probably where we would have ended, but we might not have time to get to the questions. So if we could talk about your vision for the future for financial services.
Sorry.
There's an additional part.
I know, we didn't rehearse that.
And where you may foresee major trends which might shape the industry. And I will start with Kirsty, because she's got a flight to go on, you can tell.
Yeah,
in a few
I need
hours.
to get done and get gone. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Kirsty Rutter, and I built the CVC at Lloyds Bank. My vision of the future is an agency of bots, so consumer bots. The rise of the bot agency is my prediction of the future. I recently co-authored a paper with Dave Birch that got published in the Digital Journal of Banking. And we talk about a lot in there if any of you are interested in reading about it. But effectively, when AI and open banking or open finance get together, my vision of the future is, as an individual, I can just ask a bot to operate on my behalf. And so the future for financial services will be bot-to-bot comms, and then the rise of ethics and how I want to be represented in that environment will be the challenge of the future. So my question for financial services is, who's going to run the bot agencies? There you go.
Really?
Oh, wow. I will maybe take that in a slightly different direction. As people, we all underestimate the amount of time for near-term change and overestimate the amount of time it takes for longer-term change. And so actually, I think a lot of our roles is not about the crystal ball of the point estimate for 10 years from now. It's about describing today. So I'm responsible for business development in the client division of Citi. And for me, when I think about how do we describe today, it's really about digitization. What are the trends, the irreversible trends that are allowing us to have a higher, faster metabolism for change? And to me, it's really three things coming together in this moment. So one is obviously the adoption of agile and more modern techniques around change management. Two is the huge amount of work and progress in the last few years in areas like DevOps, cloud, that have really helped us. We've done a lot around the no-code, low-code space. We've made investments there. We're using a lot of those technologies. We're building a lot of those technologies ourselves. And now generative AI. So how do you use generative AI, very specifically to help you replace, upgrade, move away from monolithic systems? And so to me, it's really about, is this a moment where the rate of change that's possible at large incumbents that already come with huge advantages can catch up to that of, say, someone small? And then what does that compounded effect look like? So to me, when I look forward 10 years, it's where the rate of change in the world, be it for an incumbent or new entrant, is probably about the same. And it's through adoption of those things that we see today.
Very good. And coming to you, Pat, then, slightly changing direction. So what are some of the non-intuitive shifts that we've seen over the last decade that have shaped financial services, and how does that impact emerging and incumbent business models?
So you talked about pace of change, and I think that would be probably top of the list. I've been amazed by the speed and how fast the market's going. I was in Germany pre and during the pandemic, and to be able to pay with my card as opposed to cash in a very cash-centric country was amazing, and that change happened in just a year. Generationally as well, my dad's 75, he now does online banking. So it's not just the younger generations that are using online banking. And then how fast instant payments have grown. You think about Pix in Brazil. You think about, in India as well, UPI. In fact, in India, they've got their own biometric program that's used by over 1 billion people. Incredible to see. And then you've got Bithum, Blick, all the local methods of payment. Secondly, I think it's about collaboration. You've seen the schemes working with banks and merchants and regulators to drive change and drive innovation. Good examples would be 3DS, token, digital identity. And then on the people side as well, you heard it earlier on, there's a real focus on wellness and employee engagement. So this flexible, hybrid working model, it's really shifted. Career mobility. You can actually run global teams in London or Madrid or Paris. You don't need to be in the US. And because things are happening so quickly, I think roles have become quite fluid. You're now starting to see product and operations really working as one, with one set of goals. So those would be just some top-of-mind thoughts.
What's your thoughts, Darren?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think, a good example, I think, of the speed of change that we talk about is, we've seen much more change over the last 5 years than we probably have in the last 50. And I think that as a good example of a product that probably, if we'd all been sitting here maybe 5, 6 years ago, no one would have mentioned, and yet it's now a mainstay, which is buy now, pay later. Buy now, pay later was pretty much wasn't really heard of, and all of a sudden, we had these organizations who brought it to market in a way that really resonated with consumers, and has now made the large banks rethink how they think about credit, how the fintechs are thinking about credit, and also consumers, how they see and think about credit. So for me, that's something that came out of almost nowhere, and is now, like I say, bedded into everyday payments, which is quite incredible. I'm sure we're going to see lots more of those types of innovations as technology starts to really change the way that our consumers are engaging. But I do think there is a bit of an elephant in the room, and probably one that we need to address, and that is around the shift recently in the way the investment for fintechs is becoming more challenging. So, and by the way, I do look down here. I'm not going to hide it. Right, here's my notes that I made earlier. A couple of key points I wanted to make. But if we look at KPMG are telling us that in a recent report that the fintech sector by 2030 will be worth around about $1.5 trillion. But at the same time, we have Deloitte's telling us that fintechs, 1 in 200 fintechs who are startups get to scale up. So there's a disconnect there, right? There is a real problem. And I think if we don't address that problem now, then the next 10 years could be a very, very challenging period of time indeed for driving that future innovation.
Perfect. I'll come back to you, Kirsty. Pat mentioned tokens, tokenization, new payment technologies. And I'd really love to hear from you, particularly with your Lloyd's hat on, how you're integrating these new technologies and ultimately how you're leveraging them to enhance the consumer experience.
Yeah, sure. So my view is that tokenization will end up being the bedrock of all banking infrastructure over the foreseeable years. And so there's a growing focus on that, everything from payments, as you said, to identity that Pat's already mentioned, and then obviously CBDC. Lots of great work happening in that space. But I think what's interesting is if you look at bringing it to life, the recent investment we made in a company called Coadjute, which is, if you, in horizon speaking, a few years out from being realized at a massive scale, but still operating. So Coadjute are bringing together the entire home ecosystem onto digital technology, onto ledger tech. And what that's going to allow us to do is create a hugely efficient and transparent experience for the consumer. The reason that, I guess from a Lloyd's perspective, but also as a consumer, the reason I'm so excited about that, and the reason that this was actually quite a significant investment in the UK, was that this was one of the first times that consumer-led investors got together to make something change in the industry. So we've seen it in cap markets. Emily and I were talking about it last week. We've seen in cap markets a lot of utility consortia, because in a B2B industry like cap markets, that's the way that things work. What we haven't seen so much is the impact that that can have on the consumer. And I think tokenization as a technology will really start to unlock more of the work that we need to create as an ecosystem for the UK to liberate that opportunity.
Okay, cool. I'll come back to you, Darren. I was wondering if you could help expand on how you think that strategic partnerships and collaborations with regulators and the governments could foster innovation and growth in the sector.
Yeah, I can be fairly quick about that. So I think, it's very clear that we live in a time of heavy regulation in the UK. The government have been very clear about how they see FinTech as driving the future of financial services here in the UK. And today it's worth 75 billion to the UK economy every year, and there's a long way for that to grow. But I think that through trade associations like Innovate Finance, I think we need to come together and have a universal view in how we influence both the regulation and the government to make sure that they're informed well enough to create that environment that we need to foster the future innovation that we all are driving towards. We have to make sure we knock those barriers out of the way. And I just think it's time for us to really start to come together. We have, I'll probably get thrown off the stage for saying this, but we have maybe slightly too many trade bodies at the moment who aren't necessarily always aligned in their views. We have hundreds of members who have very differing views, whether you're on an issuing side, acquiring side, a FinTech side, a PSP side, wherever you may be in the ecosystem. But I think if we don't come together and we're not absolutely clear about how we can drive innovation forward in a collaborative way, then again, I will say it again, I think the next decade will be a very challenging one.
And Emily, I want to come to you and actually pick up on something that Darren said earlier around only 1 in 200 fintechs making it from startup to scale up. I'd love to hear your thoughts from your perspective. What do you think the biggest hurdles are for the fintech space when trying to get there?
Yeah, so I think it's a question both on the scale-up side, but also on their client and partner side. There's one side of readiness and there's one side of self-awareness that I think you need for both sides. And we do a lot at Citi, for instance, working with startups. We work with them as our clients, particularly as they look to scale themselves and go cross-border and offer banking to them. They're often our portfolio companies. And then as a company that spends billions of dollars a year in technology, they're often awesome vendor partners to us as well. But I think it's really around being clear sort of day one where you are and what is needed, and trying to take the height of the step function to do more down. And so what is this? So on our side at Citi, it's sort of how do we make it easier, faster for companies to be onboarded? How do we create things like sandbox activities so that we can actually come up with a proof of value and proof of concept much more quickly? Things like synthetic data and other capabilities, so it's less risky for us to work together. And so making that on our sort of the surface area on our side for startups to become scale-ups, making that more successful for them. Then I think on the startup side, it's also just being acutely aware of where you are in your journey, and sort of where is that line between vision and today, what is ready. And I often talk to my team, and really it's about two things. So one is it's sort of like, how do you become the human APIs to our portfolio companies or to other great startups into our company, right? To help them, work with Citi. That's one part. Two is, often at large institutions, there's people who are great at, sort of problem solving, coming up with the idea. There's people who you need to implement it, and there's people who sign the checks. And very rarely are those three sets of responsibilities in the same human. And so I think it's also, if you're a startup becoming a scale-up, it's making sure that your team, be it sort of your sales team, your customer success team, is really deeply understanding who has what responsibilities and not. And you're not wasting your time on people who either, it's a lovely, friendly conversation, but they actually don't have the decision rights to say yes or no, or someone who's just going to throw sand in the machine from the side. So to me, it's really about that sort of readiness and self-awareness on both sides.
And maybe just one comment from me as well, who's an early stage investor and a former fintech entrepreneur. The fact that we see businesses failing, I think is just natural. And it kind of excites me that there's a a group of people in this room and in the UK who are willing to go after these really big problems to be solved, and naturally hard problems to solve come with failure. And I think that it's almost the failure is something that we should also celebrate, because we're willing to be the most ambitious in the whole of the world. So I think it's going to be hard to remove it in its entirety. Pat, coming back to you, would love to hear what you think happens in the future regarding talent and how the talent evolves within the financial services industry.
Yeah, I think number one, it's curiosity. I'm an eternal student. I think complacency is the enemy. We have to keep learning that all the time, analyze data, problem solve, and you talked about this as well. How can we improve processes? I think we need just good problem solvers who roll up their sleeves and get stuff done, not necessarily think about hierarchies or where do I fit in the organization, just swarm to a client problem, and it really starts with the client. I think secondly, it's collaboration. People who, we're in increasingly global organizations, we're going to need people who can navigate ambiguity, not just internally, but externally as well. There are a lot of players in the ecosystem. And then thirdly, someone who's truly obsessed with the customer and focuses on the customer, thinks like a customer, acts like a customer, listen, act. And then I think other things like upskilling in key areas. I mentioned it in terms of curiosity, but data and analytics, cybersecurity, AI, regulatory and compliance as well. There's a lot of regulations coming our way, and it's important to partner strongly with regulators, anticipate what's coming down the line. Learning as well. We've got a younger generation. The PowerPoint slides, putting sort of desktop, on their desk, it just doesn't work anymore. So having more interactive training, on-the-job training, make it more fun. I really needed to get fun in there somewhere. And then emotional intelligence. This is really important. I think more empathy-led leadership is really important. I think particularly the younger generations need to feel like what they're doing is adding value, and that's really key. So, yeah, curiosity though above all, curiosity and adaptability, being able to flex.
Very cool. I think that leaves me with my final question that I'll pose to you all, which is, what do you think the most, one single critical action that the financial services industry should be taking today to make sure that it's well positioned for the next decade? Do you want to start, Kirsty?
I can go, yeah. I think you've heard it through actually most of the comments on the stage. It's partnership, it's collaboration, and that's us with ourselves, and it's us with others. So I see Robin in my team in the audience. Robin is the driving force behind the bringing together of Nationwide, NatWest, Rightmove and Lloyds for the investment in Coadjute. Something that hadn't really happened before. Yes, as investors, but not as then a getting together of major mortgage industry players who want to drive change in the industry. We've not seen that in consumer, not in the UK, not at the scale that we're hoping to talk about. And from my perspective, it's more of that. That's what we need to be ready to do. And as I mentioned before, in cap markets, that's commonplace. That's a behavior that's pretty well entrenched in consumer. For the consumer to win, we're going to have to operate differently with ourselves. And that's where I think, that's where I look to.
Emily?
Yeah, and I'll build on what Kirsty said there. It's, for the consumer to win, or for the institution who's the client to win, I think we as financial services companies just need to continuously obsess about the outcomes for our clients. Yep. And, there's certain moments from a macroeconomic perspective, from a regulatory perspective, where we end up focusing a lot internally. But it's sort of making sure that we're constantly looking outwards. What does this mean for our clients? How do we create value for them? And then taking it to us next. But I think, to me, it's that sort of constant obsession which is needed.
Pat?
Embrace change. Change is constant. 2, stay curious, keep learning. And 3, invest. Invest in technology, invest in cybersecurity, and invest in your people.
Darren.
Okay, so I agree with all these points, which leads me to come up with a fresh one. So if you can all give me 5 minutes, I'm joking. I think for me, it is collaboration, but it is also, we mustn't lose focus of who we are serving, so the consumers. We all get caught up in our industry bubble, in our technology bubble. We all get very excited about the AIs and the quantum computing and machine learning and big data, all these buzzwords we've heard for a long time. But what I've witnessed in the in payments is that sometimes these things never really come to fruition. As we look at blockchain, we look at cryptocurrency, yes, of course, they will change the way that payments in the long term are engaged with. But we always seem to be focusing on the technology before we look at what those consumer use cases really are that really drive adoption. And a really great example of that, and it's a very simple example, is contactless. So, contactless, all of us in this room thought contactless was a fantastic thing, right? Well, hopefully most of us did anyway. We pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and until TfL came up with a use case that consumers said, wow, this makes my life easy or easier, then it didn't fly. And there's a really good example there of where we come up with the ideas, we come up with the approach, but then we forget to bring the consumers with us on that journey. So I think for me, number one is collaboration. I think that we have to collaborate, we have to work together. But secondly is let's not take our eye off the ball. What we do serves consumers, serves businesses. We need to ensure that everything we built is built for everybody. It's fully inclusive. We need to start developing and delivering products that are delivered with everybody in mind. And I think at the moment we go for the MPV rather than a fully inclusive solution. If we truly believe, as we go forwards over the next decade, that we will digitalize payments in the UK, which I think most of us believe will happen, then it has to be fully inclusive. We have to bring everyone with us. And if we don't start thinking like that, then it's not going to be as successful as we hope.
Wow. I hope all of the fintechs in the room heard that. We heard a lot about partnership. We heard a lot about collaboration from these large financial services firms. So we can hold them accountable. Let's make sure that they're willing to partner with the fintech firms of the future. I'd love for everyone to give the panel a round of applause. So thank you. Thank you very much.